cats and kittens. It's the Metal Hammer of Doom. And I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich, but you can call me Wheezy. Maybe not tonight, though, as I seem to have a modicum of control over my air-flowing lungs. So cross your fingers, because here's hoping. Tonight, we are reviewing, and I do mean we, are reviewing the 9th studio album by Finnish symphonic metal band Nightwish, called Human Nature, and it's stylized as human period Roman numeral 2 nature period. You could also replace the U's with V's, so the Wikipedia tells me. But I am not alone. I know I've been doing some solo reviews. I did one for Heaven Shall Burn and another one for Code Orange. But sometimes you go up on top of that building, you flick the old bat signal, sometimes he shows up, sometimes he's off somewhere blamming and powing behind the facade of a nearby warehouse. Ladies and gentlemen, the Dark Knight himself, Robert Winfree. How do you do, sir?
Wow. You turned me into a giant Mary Sue. Thanks.
you, everything I say positive, you turn negative. Everything.
It's a gift.
You really do. It's an art form for you. You are an artist.
Dude, you have no idea. I spent like 12 years of my life somewhat unconsciously turning everything positive into a giant negative. It is absolutely a gift.
You must be terribly fun at parties. Children's even.
That depends on how drunk the people watching are. Like, if you're smashed, watching me kind of like kick around small children is a blast.
Terrific. Robert Winfree, if you could walk away from the void for just a minute.
I don't know if I have to.
By the way, you'd be very proud of me. In our review of Picard this past week, I referred to the ridiculous alien that they were, synthetic life form that they were calling out of the abyss, Space Cthulhu, and got a big laugh out of Andrew. So, yeah. And it's
I haven't heard the show yet, but I will probably be making some time for that in the near-ish future.
Andrew thought it was funny, but I wouldn't have even thought of referencing Space Cthulhu had it not been for my relationship to you. So, if you've had any kind of influence on me, it's that.
I have made you... You are better for having known me.
Yes, and I am at least aware that Cthulhu is a thing.
And I wish the reverse were true.
Well, what we came here to discuss is, of course, Nightwish. And you are not my regular co-host. My regular co-host is off in the state of the OIO, trying to give people without gainful employment some form of money with a computer system that is mostly two hamsters and an abacus, as near as I can tell.
Look, and that abacus is not really functional.
No, it is not. So,
one of the hamsters is dying. The abacus is missing half of its beads and at least part of its frame. And we all wish Jesse Starcher the very best as he desperately tries not to drink himself into a coma.
So that being said, you did not have to be on this podcast, but you did volunteer after being asked. So why are you here, sir? What is it about Nightwish that tickles your sack?
I'm about 50-50 on Nightwish, but I listened to at least one of the solo reviews you did, and it was just so sad. I feel like you only work as a product if there's someone to play off of. And I couldn't leave you wallowing around in that particular void, especially if you had to talk about this album.
What'd you do? Listen to the Heaven Shall Burn one and said, wow, he's terrible when he has no one to talk to.
Sure, let's go with that one.
Okay. Well, there was only two, so...
So there's that, and I also stumbled across Nightwish a little bit accidentally several years ago, and I don't dislike them, so it should be a somewhat useful discussion, I think.
So I have a question for you. Do you have you ever gone to a heavy metal concert? First of all, have you
No.
ever gone to a concert?
Yes, I think 3.
And what bands did you grace with your presence?
Okay. 2 of these need a bit of appropriate. Actually, no. Only one of these will I say I went to see X, and you'll go, yeah, that tracks. Okay. The first one was a concert, my first ever concert. I was in high school, I think, at the time. Again, where I live geographically, I live in Utah, and not a lot of acts come through here. Not a lot of acts I want. Hang on, not a lot of acts that I want to pay for will come through here.
Well, hang on. There's a reason why I interrupted you, because as fascinating as the story is, I'm sure it's going to turn out to be. When were you a teenager, and where?
This was here in Utah. This would have been early 2000s, I think.
Okay, so in the early 2000s, you're 15-ish and living in Utah.
Yeah, my stepmom. This might have been after that, actually, now that I think about when my parents divorced.
Okay.
I was, I think, still in high school, or just very recently out of it. One of the two.
Okay.
Anyway, my stepmom got tickets to a concert that was headlined by Matchbox 20. Also, the co-headliner was Sugar Ray, and the opening act was their big break, Maroon 5.
Oh, God. And were you brought there as punishment? Did you cut
No.
school? And, like, your mom said you can't... Did you throw a party at home with beer? And your mom said you can't be trusted? I'm taking you to Maroon 5?
No.
Did you go because you wanted to?
I didn't know that Maroon 5 was there. I only recognized them after the fact. Like, when one of their songs came on the radio, and oh, I know that song. I heard them sing it.
Did you do the trifecta and do Big Head Todd and the Monsters?
I don't know who that is.
Okay, well then, to the people who know who Big Head Todd was, as compared to Maroon 5, that joke's really funny. Go on.
Okay. So, that was one of my first ones, and it wasn't a bad concert experience. I don't dislike Matchbox 20.
Yeah, they're all right.
My mom's sister, one of my aunts, when I forget how old I was. This would have been also kind of out of high school. So my early pre-20s, maybe 1920. So 2005, 2006. Motley Crue came through.
Woo!
And I went to see them.
Good. Now you saw something with some balls on it.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. This was one of the last albums they released. I think this was in kind of a concert with their single had just...
Was this the John Corabi years?
I don't know. I genuinely don't. Who was he and what did he...
He's the singer after Vince Neil left.
No. Vince Neil was there.
Post Dr. Feelgood.
No, this is Vince Neil. Vince Neil was there. This was after, what's that single? Like, If I Die Tomorrow came out.
Okay.
I think it was kind of in whatever project they had kind of going on with that. This was kind of in conjunction with that. I think Avenged Sevenfold opened for them.
Oh, this is after Vince Neil came back then.
Yeah. I can't remember who the opening act was, but yeah, I saw Motley Crue. That was a lot of fun. Tommy Lee did a great thing where he had 2 elevated drum platforms. And this was the USANA Amphitheater, which is an outdoor arena.
Did he fly around on a rail?
Yeah, actually, he jumped between these 2 drum sets that were set up on either lateral end of the stage, and then one of them blew up.
Yeah, I've seen video of that, and I know one of the drummers from Slipknot does that routine.
Yeah, so I saw that. That was a lot of fun. And then same aunt and one of her stepdaughters, when the Scorpions came through with their final tour, she got tickets, and we went to that.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Well, if you haven't had an opportunity to see Nightwish in concert, or the opportunity arises at a theater in Utah near you, you really should go. They put on a hell of a show. I got to see them a couple of years ago. Well, gosh, it's more than that now. I keep forgetting it's been a decade since I've been with my wife. Shortly into...
Because it feels like 2, right? Marriage jokes.
Yeah. Shortly into dating my wife, Folk Fest, which sounds more white than it was. It was actually a metal show. So when we say Folk Fest, that might not have actually been called Folk Fest. It might have been called Folk something else. Pagan Fest, that's what it was. Pagan Fest came to New York, and it was a collection of folk metal bands. So it was like Fintroll and Kopaklani, and a bunch of bands like that. All came
Hey,
to New York.
folk metal is really cool if you get people that do it right.
Sure. So a whole bunch came to New York, and they did like a short tour of the United States, because these were all European metal bands. So they were playing New York, and I flew up specifically for that show. And while I was there, my buddy Chuck was like, you know who's playing the night before when you come in, if you can get here early enough. And I said, who's that? And he's like, Nightwish is playing at BB King's Blues Bar in Manhattan the night before Pagan Fest. I'm like, hot damn. So I ended up seeing Nightwish then. I don't think, what's her nuts? Tarja was still in the band at that point. I think this was singer number 2 by the time this happened. But either way, I got to see Nightwish in concert then. And let me reiterate, if you ever have an opportunity to see them live, it's worth it. There's an element to their live act that sometimes doesn't come through in a studio recording that's just breathtaking. So, we talked about how you got into Nightwish, right?
Sort of, yeah. I accidentally stumbled across them after. Oh God. Okay. I don't discover music the same way a lot of people do.
Okay.
Full disclosure. I think the sequence of events happened as follows. I heard some Within Temptations on a Mirko Krokop highlight on YouTube. When I liked that song, what is it? Looked it up. And then Nightwish kind of came up as recommended relative to that, just female vocalist-led kind of symphonic metal. And I think that's kind of how I stumbled across them. And again, I'm about 50-50 on them as far as a lot of my personal enjoyment goes. Probably a little bit more favorable than that.
As far as symphonic metal bands go, that are, I like to call them opera metal, at least this iteration of symphonic metal. Do you listen to, like, Epica?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really fine line for my personal enjoyment about how much of the operatic stuff I think works in metal. Mm-hmm. And that's where some of my Nightwish stuff kind of, butts up against, you went too far with this.
Last question, and then we can kind of get into the album. I think in terms of operatic metal, you have your Blind Guardian, can't think of the other band, but the other band that's in Demons and Wizards. Right on the tip of my tongue, too.
Hang on, let me see if I can look it up.
It's funny, we just talked about this when we talked about Demons and Wizards.
Let's see. Demons and Wizards band.
People listening.
Iced Earth.
Thank you. People listening to this are screaming Iced Earth. Listen, folks, I haven't had a lot of oxygen in the brain lately. I'm losing certain details. So I think there's like an even split between your Nightwish / Epica female-fronted symphonic metal and your male-oriented Blind Guardian Iced Earth. Which do you tend to prefer?
I'm not sure, because it really does kind of come down to like the individual songs. I tend to find the female voice a more interesting instrument than the male voice as a general rule.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And given the just lack of female, this has been changing over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, but the female voice in a rock or a metal capacity is, I think, wildly underutilized. And it does tend to, so I'm more willing to take a chance on that, which has led me down some, paths that are like, oh boy, that was not good. But for me, I don't really have a clear point of delineation as far as, well, I prefer, it's very much an individual kind of case-by-case thing. I enjoy them both. I think, again, properly done, like symphonic, operatic metal is a very interesting subgenre of metal, and it comes down to like individual execution, I think, more than anything else.
I want to say it was Within Temptation, and I may have the band wrong. I might have to look it up later. But if I'm thinking of the right band, I think Within Temptation does a cover of Meatloaf's. This is going to bother me now. I'm going to have to look it up. Did a cover of I'll Do Anything for Love, but I Won't Do That, which is amazing, and it's made, in my opinion, it's made amazing by the female vocalist. I've heard the Meatloaf version, and you can give or take Meatloaf. This isn't a discussion of his merits, and you may not even like that song, but I think as a gimmick and as just a sort of resume of talent, a display of talent, I think that song goes a long way in showing that Meatloaf is talented, but I think it's elevated by this other band because of the female vocalization.
You're thinking of, I think it's Xandria.
Xandria, yes, you're right.
Which is a pretty solid band all the way around, and yeah, I think I've heard that as well, and it's really nice.
Yes, it is. It was one of my favorite finds of last year. All right, so Nightwish put out Human Nature April 10th of this year. We're getting around to it today. And they released 2 singles from this, Noise and Harvest. It's a double album. The side A of the album is a traditional symphonic metal album with most tracks averaging between 5 and 6 minutes long. Some a little longer, one less as such. And then the second side, the B side, is a soundtrack. All the works of nature which adorn the world. And what you're going to get from us tonight is side A. Side B has to be listened to like you would listen to a movie soundtrack. I played it at work. And we all kind of came to, and we are disparate people with different tastes in music, but I think we all agreed that this sounded like a very new agey, soundtrack to a fantasy film. And I think...
So, Enya.
Yeah, very Enya-ish. It's not bad, but I think it has to be... It's not one of these deals where you can take a piece of it and there's really a lot to talk about. Not the way we do this podcast, at least. Somebody else out there maybe would have a different approach to it. I almost think, it could be playing in the background as there's discussion. But A, that's a rights issue. B, if you want to listen to roughly a half an hour of people talking over this thing, more power to you. I don't know how you feel, Robert, but I don't feel like it's appropriate on this podcast to try to play portions of it and find something to review, talk about, etc.
Look, this is your show. I'm along for the ride.
Well, you listen to it. What's your opinion?
I don't really have a strong opinion on the B-side. I don't think I finished it, in all honesty. I think, because I was listening to some of it, and you mentioned, hey, we're only doing the human side. I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about on the nature side. I went, oh, thank God.
Okay. So, somewhere therein in my lengthy explanation, you're like, yeah, good. Got it.
I mean, again, it's not bad for, ambient music or whatnot, but it's really not... I mean, you'd need a really, really fine-tuned musical pod. Let me be clear, this is not a knock on this show, but we don't get into a lot of the nuts and bolts of music. We don't discuss the value of different, intervals and step patterns and ascending. You need a really technical breakdown of the music to discuss that particular half of this album, I think, and that's just not what we bring.
No. We are, at best, amateur music fans. I'm not a musician. I don't know about you. Jesse's certainly
Not even close.
Jesse is certainly not a musician, and I think we try to talk about the patterns and breakdowns and shades of music, but there's only so far I can go without a music theory background for a lot of this. So that being said, we're going to stick with the rock side of this, let's call it that, and the traditional side. And the first track here, we're gonna start at about 3 minutes in because it's a long one, the 7 some odd minute song. Number one. Number two, it takes a while to get going. So here we go. This is Music for the People. Takes 4 minutes for that song to get going.
Yeah. That's a rough one. When that song finally does kind of get going, it's kind of catchy. It sets up... I'm going to spoil some of this. I don't care much for this album in totality. I get kind of the concept that they're going for, but I think what results is stuff that's very samey. And I'm not opposed to concept albums as a generalized, in some kind of like broad-based sense of, but this one just doesn't work for me as a concept. It does not lend itself well, or it's not executed properly. I don't know where you would place more of the blame. That said, this does, again, when the song itself kind of gets going, it's got enough of the kind of rousing upbeats to be somewhat memorable, but this is, when you consider just the 3 minutes of kind of ambient intro, this is a shaky start.
So I have a slightly different take, and I'm not trying to be purposely contrarian. This isn't like my view of Halle Berry and Catwoman or anything.
Which, for those of you who don't know, Mark has a very trollish opinion on. He thinks that is just the apex of high art.
I have leaned into it, and I'm not looking back. But if I could be serious for a moment, here's the thing. I think in terms of setting a tone and you started to talk about this a little bit. I think this sets the tone for the rest of the album, and hate it or love it. I think if you're patient with this album, I think if you're in for the long haul and you're willing to just sort of accept that A, it's a concept album, B, Nightwish is long in the tooth to begin with much of their stuff. They're not writing, even for symphonic metal, poppy, easily digestible music. They are stretching boundaries, and I don't mean to say that like they're more esoteric or avant-garde. I just think that this is sit down and really take it in kind of music. And I think I would say for a while now, probably since, gosh, it's been some time. I want to go back here because like I think once. Once, which came out in 2004, and Dark Passion Play in 2007, I think you get more, like these on the average are 4 to 5 minute songs, and I think you get more, when did If I Had an Angel come out? That might have been once. Wish I Had an Angel. There you get more of an easily, and then Tarja was on there, you get more of a crowd-pleasing metal album with operatic vocals, as opposed to, I think, what the band kind of at least with this album, is trying to do with here. We're just kind of letting it all hang out, and we're not really worried about trying to create a buzz clip. I know it's sort of a dated term, but if you follow my meaning, I feel like with this album, they're trying things, and they're not really worried about easily digestible tracks.
Would you believe there's actually a couple of decent Christopher Daniels tribute music videos or whatnot on YouTube set to I Wish I Had an Angel?
I would believe that.
Yeah, they exist. I agree with you. I agree with your kind of general perception. I will say this about this album, and this is to its credit. It is unapologetically artistic. Yes. It is their vision. It is their art seen to its completion. Where that lands for you on a personal level of enjoyment or whatnot, they are not doing this for commercial success. Yeah. They're doing this because this is what they wanted to do. And they certainly get credit for that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean I'm not going to say I think some of this stuff doesn't work. But
yeah, I'm all for... And I've said this to Jesse. I think I've said it to you. I might have said it on the last podcast. As long as you're doing you, I can respect that, Booker man. What I tend to get kind of irritated about, and I start screaming on this podcast, and Jesse has heard me say some real choice things about certain bands, is when I feel like you're trying way too hard to be commercially viable to the point of not having a soul. And then it's fucking on like Donkey Kong. I personally can't deal with it.
That also known as the Saint Anger syndrome.
Sure. All right. So this next one's a single. It came out February 7th, 2020. This is Noise.
Now you're a star, playing avatar, feeding the beast in your loudie.
noise. If you could take, like, a classic, sort of general Nightwish sound and bottle it up, put it in a pill or something, it would be that song. Yep,
that is unmistakably Nightwish.
Yeah, it is. I don't want to brand it with samey. That has a negative connotation to it, and we're only 2 songs in, so I feel like
this is
that for a minute.
Well, this is like this is the quintessential Nightwish sound that we get in this particular song.
Yes.
For better or for worse, but this is very, very Nightwish.
It's funny in the wiki. The album features a wide vocal collaboration between Jansen, Marco Hayatala, Troy Donakali, which brings, quote, a whole new sound in the band. Okay, I believe you, but this ain't it.
Yeah, whatever portion that they're discussing, it is not this song in particular.
No, sir.
I mean, that said, it's not like it's a bad song.
No, it's a great song, but, like, if I were to listen to the entire catalog of Nightwish, I would hear that arrangement of notes and style of singing about a dozen times, and that might be a conservative estimate.
That is a very conservative estimate.
Okay. All right, let's move on. This next one is called Shoemaker. It has kind of a creepy Nightmare Before Christmas kind of feel to it. I think what sells it for me is the drumming and the guitar work on that. Not so much her singing. Her singing, it's not flat. That's the wrong word. I don't think she's doing anything particular. It's good. She sounds pretty. I don't think she's doing anything interesting with it. I don't think she's leaning into the tenor of that song. If you take her vocals out of it and you just played that, I could see there being like creepy imagery associated with the guitar work and the drumming in that. It has a menace to it.
Yeah, it does. And I think this would be one of the instances in this particular album of the vocals potentially having a slightly different feel to them, because when you have the male portion of the song that comes in, that's where you get just the slightly ominous vibe, much more than you get from her.
Yeah. I almost, wonder if sometimes they wouldn't benefit from leaving her off the track entirely. This one being a good example of that.
I don't know. It would be an interesting experiment, I suppose.
Just because I think even pretty male voices still can sometimes have an edge to them that you need depending on the kind of song you're putting out there. I think this would have benefited from more edgy vocalization than pretty vocalization. I think too often Nightwish sort of rests on the laurels of compare and contrast in terms of harsh and pretty. And sometimes I just want harsh. Sometimes I just want pretty.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Anything else about Shoemaker?
Not really. It's a fine song. It's this particular this half of the album does a fair bit of. We mentioned some of the concept going on here. It tends to flip-flop between like the perspective of various like elements of the earth or something along those lines, and then different points along the trajectory of human society and evolution. And Shoemaker in this instance is one of those that I think is meant to be looking more towards the future. That's a bit of the irony of that being, of course, that a lot of the lyrics here are taken from Romeo and Juliet, and the inspiration from that particular character in that play. But it's meant more to be a bit, look at the stars and wonder at our place in the universe kind of thing. And then we have other stuff that's very grounded. In fact, the next song in particular.
So according to the wiki in the influences, styles, and themes portion, Shoemaker is about Eugene Shoemaker, whose biography inspired Paul Penyan to write a song on it. According to Jansen, the song lacks of a typical structure. Consisting of operatic vocals, the song was a challenge to Jansen to sing, and it took several times to record until the desired result. Johanna Kirkella, Halapanyan's wife, took part in this song, performing a spoken part before Jansen's ending operatic part. You know anything about this Eugene Shoemaker person?
Not off the top of my head.
An American geologist and one of the founders of the field of planetary science. He co-discovered Comet Shoemaker, Levy 9, with his wife Carolyn S. Shoemaker and David H. Levy. This comet hit Jupiter in July 1994. The impact was televised around the world.
Okay, then.
Wow. Something you don't know? Because, I'm always amazed at the, random bits of archaic knowledge that you'll somehow, hit upon. I'll just say something, and you're like, yes, there was a thing. And then, 20 minutes later, I'm like, how did you find time to know that?
Well, if anyone in the future asks me about Eugene Shoemaker, I will tell them that I know it because of this podcast.
Well, there you go. And you do have the memory of Sheldon and/or an elephant, so which is definitely one of the differences between you and I. I have the memory of a damn sponge. So, but the personality of a firecracker. Let's move on before you comment on that.
That's a good choice.
All right, this next one is another single. It was released March 6th. This is called Harvest.
Gave mankind a rose so we could see the view. face aglow before the scythe. Join the harvest of 100 fields, hearty and tame, all going back to one single grain. Offer light to the coming day, inspire a child. Water the fields, surrender to the earth. Water the fields, surrender to the earth. Water the fields, surrender to the earth. They have beauty beyond the poetry, but choose a silent misery. The deeper the sea, the less remains. They'll find the pretty words and tame flocks to herd. There's that sort of arousal in the air.
Born of cold and winter air and mountain rain combining, this icy forth both foul and fair has a frozen heart worth binding. So cut through the heart, cold and clear, strike for love and strike for fear. See the beauty sharp and sheer, split the ice apart and break the frozen heart. Yup, ho, watch your step, let it go. Yup, ho, watch your step, let it go.
Feel good about that?
So, I feel like you might have questions now. Ask away.
No. I get what you're doing.
Am I wrong?
A little.
I'm sorry. That song, if you just played it out of the blue with no context, I would swear to you it's from a not yet released Disney musical about some fucker on a farm.
I don't disagree with you.
Okay. So what do you disagree with, sir? Tell me, Poppy, what do you disagree with?
Oh, how dare you.
I feel like if you wanted to, you could have your own cult. But let's not talk about that right now.
No, I couldn't. I don't think I could personally have my own cult.
How is that not the Chopping Ice song from the beginning of Frozen? Only done with wheat and farms.
I haven't heard the Chopping Ice song from the beginning of Frozen because I'm a man.
I'm a man with a penis and I have no children, so I've never seen Frozen. Good day to you, sir.
Hang on, I didn't say I'd never seen it. I've seen it once.
You don't remember the whole beginning bit where they're chopping ice?
Vaguely. Tell you what, I will give you one guess as to the context for me having seen that movie once.
You were giving blood.
I was donating plasma, that is correct.
Yep, I knew it.
Meaning I had no say over the matter.
Did you see it in the beginning?
I came in, I think, as that song was playing.
Okay, so it would not necessarily been something you were focusing on and then stick in your head. Or given much thought to.
That is correct.
Okay.
I mean, to be fair, I did see the rest of it and none of it stuck in my head because it's a terrible movie.
You know, someone who might be listening to this, who for some weird reason is also a big Frozen fan, probably like, that's not really how the song goes. Those are, in fact, the lyrics because I Googled them. But I don't actually... What I remember is the Honest trailer going, "We are chopping ice because we are chopping ice." And either way, I was like, I'm just singing it my way because I don't remember how this goes.
Well, if we might delve into why those are similar, they're both set in those particular Nordic countries. I don't know. I don't think they ever specify that Frozen takes place in Finland.
It's a fictionalized.
It's probably a fictionalized Norway.
I was going to say it's a fictionalized Norway that isn't called Norway.
Point being, they're clearly drawing the cultural influences of that particular location for this song.
Yep.
And it's fairly obvious that Nightwish leaned into some of the Finnish traditional folk music in their inspiration for this song as well, so there's going to be a fair bit of overlap.
Yeah.
There's just not really any two ways around that one.
Odd choice for a metal album.
Again, jokes aside, I do kind of dig this song.
You fucking would.
again, I'm not opposed to various folk style metal. So again, is this going on my playlist or anything? No.
But now I want to play D&D with you, but only if you play a bard.
Oh no, you do not want me to play a bard.
Because I played a bard once with no musical talent, so that didn't work out very well when they expected me to do something musical. But now I'm dying to see you play. I'm dying to see you spin fantastical tales while twanging your lute.
Okay, again, I have no musical ability whatsoever.
Okay.
I can't sing. I can barely keep. I can keep rhythm. Okay, I play no instrument at all. If I were to play a bard in Dungeons and Dragons, my inspiration would not be of the musical variety.
Good.
I would probably go for more of the oratory skills.
Of a Shakespeare in First Night, I think it was.
That was not Shakespeare. That was Chaucer.
Was that? I thought that was Shakespeare. That was.
Are you seriously going to question my knowledge of? First of all,
you have the right movie.
You're not even thinking of First Night. First Night is a take on the Arthurian legend starring Sean Connery and Richard Gere. You're thinking of A Knight's Tale starring Heath Ledger and Paul Bettany as Geoffrey Chaucer.
No, it was Shakespeare. Except that you're probably right because my memory is shit. But I swear
Feel free. Look it up and see how right I am.
I trust you, but in my mind right now, with absolutely nothing to back it up, it's Shakespeare.
Okay. I cannot control what goes on in your mind. I can only inform you it is wrong.
Correct. According to Denockley, the lyrics of Harvest consist of the meaning of the whole theme of the album and even of life. Seems a bit broad.
That's one of those sequences where we need a written bit. Give us something we can put out about this album for disc jockeys to talk about. It touches on the meaning of life. Yeah, that sounds suitably vague and pretentious enough for people to spin their own stories out of it.
Boy, you are kidding. Jesus Christ. I mean, I like Nightwish, but if someone were to say they were a little too up their own ass, I wouldn't argue with them.
Neither would I. Again, I don't dislike this song, but it's also... How do I say this? I think there's better versions of taking this kind of folk music and applying metal to it, you know?
Yeah, I think they stole this from Elton John and ran away with their hands in the air going, hee.
It probably wouldn't be hard.
The man is up there in age, isn't he? Are they auditioning for a Disney musical, you think, with this one?
It's an interesting thought. No.
I mean, I don't know how they would get this to somebody working for Disney Studios, even in an ancillary way, to be like, hey, Nightwish put out this sort of folkish ode to their homeland, Elton John-style, Lion King, Tarzan kind of evoking song. Maybe we can get them to do something for Raya and the Last Dragon or whatever the fuck they come up with for after that.
I think Nightwish is probably just a bit... I mean, can you seriously... There might be a few songs from theirs that we can kind of go, okay, this clearly has some influences and wouldn't feel out of place on X Disney movie, but can you actually imagine them functioning within the studio system of Disney?
They would definitely need a go-between. There'd have to be a guy akin to, like, the Office Space. My job is dealing with people. That would have to try to... They'd need a Bruce Pritchard. Mark that off on your bingo cards, everybody. As Jim Cornette describes him, an explainer to kind of take Disney notes and then go to Finland or Norway or wherever the hell they're recording at the time and be like, okay, I'm not saying this is what Disney told me directly, but what if we did this? And then, in collection of eye rolling and like, okay, but you like the checks, right? Okay, so what if we like what you did here, but what if we put a talking snowman in there? Just saying.
Yeah. I don't think they would fare very well in the Disney creative process.
I think they'd take the checks. I think they would
sure.
do as they were told, But I think when it was over, they'd never do anything like that again.
And almost certainly, as soon as the contractually mandated non-disclosure agreement period of time was up, they'd bury the whole process.
Oh yeah.
Their next album would be all about like breaking free of slavery and tyrannical overlords.
Burning the Mouse Kingdom from Nightwish.
Yeah.
Coming to 2025.
Yeah, that's kind of how that would go, I think. Point being, it's a fun little, folky, loosely metal-ish song. It's not great, but it's entirely inoffensive and is, if it comes on, I don't think anyone's ever going to request this song, but no one's going to complain when it comes on.
No, they're going to think you're listening to fucking Tarzan or Disney. Or Tarzan or Lion King, rather. All right, moving on.
Seriously, Tarzan, not good. Phil Collins is terrible.
So this next one reminds me.
Oh, you're not gonna touch that one, huh?
Nope. This next one reminds me of a little movie we used to review once upon a time, Robert and I. This is called Pan. For a minute there, and only a minute, less than that, really seconds, I was like, someone get Jerry Bruckheimer on the phone. We found the band to score your next Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
There's a little of that.
Very little, because it changed. Like, I had that thought, and then I went in a whole other direction, and I never really went back again, and I was sorely disappointed.
I don't know, maybe I've just heard the Pirates themes too often. I mean, in no small part because Disney, well, not Disney, yeah, it is Disney, sorry, and Hans Zimmer are very liberal about allowing other people to play that music. Mm-hmm. So I've heard a lot of that. This is one of those songs that, you mentioned earlier, you need something with a little bit of edge to it because there's some creepy stuff here. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I don't think we ever really get that leaned into enough for this particular song. That said, I mean, I do largely enjoy this one, but this is also a song that I listened to it the first time and went, there's a better version of this somewhere. And I'm sad I didn't get that.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, I get droplets of really epic, over-the-top, orchestral, image-evoking, provoking music from this album, and then it's like just the tip, and then it runs away. Screaming. Hands in the air.
Can't imagine why.
Well, no, I mean, I'm talking about the band here.
I know what you mean.
I just, like, I guess for me, and this might be the way that I'm wired, like, either go all in, like, commit 100%, or don't waste my fucking time. I think there's a way to do touches on things without full commitment, but you have to be very careful about the tapestry you're weaving when you do that in order to keep at least my interest. For this album, they're failing to do that, and then they don't really lean into anything. They don't commit to some of these big ideas that they start to evoke, and then it just becomes kind of meh.
I can see where you're getting at with that. Again, I think this one you need to lean into this one being creepy, and you can do that with big, orchestral numbers. There's plenty of creepy songs that are set up that way, but unfortunately, this one it kind of skirts around the edge of, again, what it could have been.
There were some interesting ideas here, but like I said, just as quickly as they touch on it, they abandon it. And what you're getting once they've abandoned the interesting thing is kind of a samey thing. I think now you can put that out there and it not be unfair.
Well, we're 5 tracks into
Yes.
a 9-track side of the album, so we're over halfway.
Yep.
Yeah, we've definitely hit kind of samey territory here.
A couple of thoughts here from some other folks. This got high marks from most of the other outlets that are out there.
I think if you take this song in a vacuum, it's much better than if you take it as number 5 on this track list.
That's probably fair. Louder Sound gave the album a positive review. Gave it 4 out of 5 stars. You know, a band feels pretty confident when they take liberties with the rules of language of rock and roll. But however you pronounce the punctuation and consonant title, Human Nature, Nightwish's first studio album for 5 years, doesn't try to confuse us any further.
Interesting take.
Yeah, I feel like that was a really roundabout, kind of backhanded way of saying they made an average album, and then gave it 4 out of 5 stars for some weird reason.
Yeah, that seems about right.
All Music gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars, saying, though the work seems part and parcel of the Nightwish aesthetic on its own, it may not appeal to all fans. That said, it does add depth and dimension to Human Nature, which is, with one exception, a consistently and deeply satisfying outing that was worth waiting for.
I mean, again, I'm perfectly willing to accept that individual mileage will vary on this one.
Sure. All right, let's move on. This next one is called How's the Heart? two things. One, that's my favorite song off this album so far. I love it. It's got little disco notes. It's got some rock and roll notes. It gets going right away. Also, keeping with the theme of this is the audition tape for for soundtracking a Disney musical. Strip that away, reconfigure it to be sung by pop star of the now. You've got a hit on your hands with that one. That's your Let It Go.
Oof, that's painful.
I'm not wrong.
Yeah, you would need some pretty serious kind of rework. Yeah. That would have to. There's some pretty significant stuff that would have to be changed about that song to get it to that point.
Yes, but I think the bones are there. The girders are there.
Well, I mean, they're going to have to remove the references to John Doe's and whatnot.
Sure. It's like
because
dog down
Disney.
the weeds with this.
But the weeds are where the magic happens.
I just picture a blonde white girl standing at the peak of some sort of artifice, some sort of geographic structure, and she's shouting, singing, oh so prettily into the atmosphere. How's the... It won't be me, for sure. How's the... Damn it!
Just stop.
How's
You can't...
the heart? I can't do high notes, obviously.
You couldn't do any of that song on your best day, much
How's
less...
the heart?
Please
really
stop.
lean into it.
Dude, you're going to wake up your children and the neighbor's dogs.
There are a lot of dogs I saw today in this neighborhood. More than I thought.
Just, it's not a good idea for you to continue with that.
They're going to send police to my house for causing a noise disturbance.
Could be. That said, I do kind of agree with you about the song as far as... if I had to pick one off of this album that I really liked, this would not be my favorite. This wouldn't be number one.
This should be the lead single.
That I agree with. This is my personal number 2 on this album.
Love it.
On number 1 is coming up in a moment. But yeah, I enjoyed it. This one and Noise are probably the most obviously commercial, mass appeal kind of songs out of this particular album. And it's a fine song. It's got some nice stuff to it. If you've seen the music video, it's not bad either. So,
Jalapenian has said, "Human empathy, altruism, true love. They truly are the better angels of our nature, the nature of humankind. We have the potential to be such a great species."
Is someone looking for an excuse to become a political / sociology op-ed writer instead of just being a freaking music critic?
And no, this is one of the dudes in the band.
And
in many ways.
Okay. In which case, you are stoned out of your mind, I assume, at this point.
Yeah, this is the keyboard, piano, production, recording, and mixer.
Oh god, nobody cares about that guy.
I'm actually surprised you haven't like gotten into me about my pronunciation of some of these names.
Dude, I really could.
How are you letting me get away with Jalapenian?
Okay. In all fairness, I thought you were referencing a website. Because you've read a couple of others, like, oh, so there's a website out there called Jalapeno Opinion. That tracks.
Okay, we're gonna end the podcast there. Because that's the name of my new opinion website, Jalapeno Opinions. So the keyboard said, and in many ways,
if I had thought you were referencing a person, I would have gone, oh god, stop, just stop.
HOLAPENION. Jalopinen. Jalapeno.
Just go. Just I'm. It is so much more. There's some names that I'm happy to kind of roast you over. It's too much effort when it comes to this. Like it would take me more effort to make a big deal out of it than it is easy to just kind of let you do the stupidity. This is not a hill I'm going to die on when it comes to this. Other times, yes.
Let me say this. You may find it painful and get a little tickle in your sack because you get to make fun of me for it, and I really can't defend myself because I read fucking names like an illiterate. But I can't tell you how many times actual bands have reached out to us thinking it's hilarious that I've mispronounced their names the way that I have, and then said, oh, and by the way, we're glad you enjoyed the album or whatever. We want...
Seriously, you've received those, letters and whatnot? Those emails, those tweets, those comments?
From the bands, yeah.
That's cool.
From the... Yeah, that's not a joke.
No, I completely believe you.
One band, actually... They wrote about like the geographic entity Ford, F-O-R-D.
Yeah, no. If you're talking about the geographic thing, it's F-J-O-R-D.
Okay, then I may also have that wrong. They were not either way. They were not referencing a car when they were writing about the yellow Ford. But because Jesse and I are both idiots, we went to fucking town on it, and we made up a whole story about the yellow Ford.
If they're talking about a fjord, F-J-O-R-D is
it's not spelled that way. That's the problem, because that I would have known. I know what a fjord is. I've read Hitchhiker's Guide.
You would know that only from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, wouldn't you?
The point is, the band actually, because they thought we were hilarious, reached out to us and explained what the song actually meant and what a Ford was.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So on the off chance Nightwish hears this and is not horribly offended.
It's all out of love, Nightwish. How's the heart? Let me ask you. Human empathy, altruism, true love. They truly are the better angels of our nature, the keyboardist said. The nature of humankind. We have the potential to be such a great species, and in many ways, we already are. It is really important to remember to ask your family, your friends, strangers, and yourself the most important question. Robert Winfree, how's the heart?
Dying slowly. God. You know what? No, I'm not going to get off on the tangent. I'm not going to do it.
Okay. Groovy.
For the record, there's a very real tangent I'm sorely tempted to go off on as it pertains to that, because I am personally beyond sick to death of people who... And let me be clear, this is not aimed at the keyboardist in particular when it comes to this. But there's a notion, a movement around like parts of... social media is probably it's a terrible barometer. But Mark, I have to ask, you have probably never been on the receiving end of this, given how you are as a person. But have you ever had someone just kind of look over at you in disgust, or what I presume is disgust given the context of the conversation, and go, well, why don't you get some empathy?
Frequently my coworkers.
Because I say that just because you are one of the most empathetic people I know. You just managed to properly temper that with
a healthy degree of cynicism.
Well, you know how, and again, part of the reason I object to it is, well, who in the world thinks an overabundance of empathy is a good thing? You know what happens to overly empathetic people?
Tell us.
Nothing good. Look, the same way you don't want too little empathy.
Nothing in extremes is good. Life is balance, or so I've been told.
Yeah. Point being, there's a number of... I have been told once or twice... you disagree with my position. Well, why don't you get some empathy? As though that is somehow going to radically alter my worldview.
Wow. That is somebody who doesn't have a counterpoint and doesn't like to lose arguments then.
That is correct. And that's one of the reasons I profoundly... I just object. I've seen it a few times. as a method of people shutting down arguments before they even start. And if you don't like this, well, why don't you get some empathy? Like, how about you're the one who brought up this particular topic of conversation? If you wanted to have a conversation, then fine. If you just want to scream into the void, I can't stop you. But don't pretend that that it's anything else than other than that.
I have told you thousands of times that I quit talking about really serious things with most people because I felt like they just wanted a lobby. They didn't want to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested. I lost interest in being lobbied. It's also why I treat a lot of stuff. Like, you like to say of me, well, this is why nobody takes you seriously, or I can't take you seriously, or whatever. Yeah,
there are certain things I know I can't take you seriously on. That's all.
But my way of relating to the world, in sort of a trollish... Somebody referred to me at work, I think I told you this before, as passively antagonistic. And
that's about right.
Yeah, and that's purposeful. Because it's the only way I can deal with a world that is passively aggressive.
Well, and again, the world being the way it is, I don't blame you for finding a coping mechanism that works for you.
Yeah.
And in all seriousness, if it gets morons to leave you alone more often than not, more power to you.
Yes, if you say something completely idiotic in a room full of people that think you're serious, boy, will the conversations end quickly.
And the inability of people to discern the difference between...
It helps to be sarcastic. All right, moving on.
Sarcasm has been dead for 2.5 years.
I'm bringing it back, along with It's Fine. I want that on my tombstone, by the way. I said I'm fine. I actually told the girls at work. I said I am dealing with a thing. You know that thing I'm dealing with. I'm doing my best to minimize that thing. Whatever happens, if I'm having a moment, leave me alone. Let me be. Don't ask if I'm okay. The answer is I'm fine. The only time I need help is if I fall face down and don't immediately get back up again. In which case, revive me. I've died.
That's fair enough.
But gasping for breath, coughing my brains out, whatever the case may be, it's all... I went off on one of my superiors because she had the audacity to ask me if I was okay after I told her I was fine while I was gasping for breath.
You're sitting there gasping for air, Mark. They just want to know how your heart is.
Fuck you, I'm fine.
How's the heart? Cold and dead.
Yes. I just got that. Thank you for relating back to the album. We can keep going now.
Yeah, I was trying to give you a pretty good segue back in.
Well done.
Thank you. I try. We should have Procession coming up next.
I believe you are correct. Procession.
A cradle earth, a rising sun sea, new world and thirst for the arcane. We are singers of the calm. We remember as the long came life, a cradle earth, a rising sun sea, birth of one and a zillion side shows. We are, we were, and will not be. We remember as the long came acorn, another birth, another moss green, new world and thirst for the unseen, an empty suit, a starlight feature. We'll have a visit as the long came heartbeat. Another birth, another monster, endless force, towards the stronger menagerie of a new world order.
well, I zoned out on that one.
Okay, for the record, if you're anyone who might be remembering that I said after How's the Heart that my favorite song from this album was coming up, I got my track listing backwards. It is not that song.
Yep.
This is a needlessly self-indulgent, maudlin piece of music.
Yeah.
It leans into one of the great fallacies of, I think, the contemporary world. Mark, just for the record, I think something like 90% of all species that have ever existed on the planet have gone extinct.
Okay.
You know how many of them we're responsible for?
Probably less than people think.
So, the way people talk about climate change and how the world works, you'd think we killed the dinosaurs.
Don't make me laugh. It hurts.
I mean this in all seriousness. Humanity has only been around the planet for a relatively short period of time relative to its existence. Look at how many things existed and died out long before we got here. However you think we got here. I'm not going to try and
Can you put a thumbtack in wherever this is going and explain the song and why you're on this rant before you rant?
Okay. This song in particular is essentially about the long march to the grave that other species are going through as they're observing humanity. And if you watch like the music video and some of the other stuff, it's just a series of images about, this particular animal critically endangered, this one threatened, this one moderately endangered, etc., etc. It's like, oh God, shut up.
You know, my cousin, when she was in elementary school, went on a rant about how humans are the worst things on the planet because we kill all the innocent animals. And I said, someday I hope you grow up to not be an idiot.
It's so true. I'm not condoning everything that humanity does as it pertains to our interaction with the world, okay? The climate changed eons before humanity got here. All right? Wasn't us. Sorry, hate to burst your bubble. Species die out all the time. And if you want to argue that there's some inherent tragedy in that, okay, I'm not necessarily going to disagree with you.
Gosh, on a grand universal scale, that's very vague and general. I'm sad shit dies.
Yes, it is. Because a lot of these people are not fully... they don't really understand things, Mark.
Yeah.
You know this.
God, that's... Like, I think I don't get caught up in a lot of stuff like that because it's too stupid to think.
It is. It is so unbelievably stupid. Like it falls apart under its own logic. Well, if only people weren't here to do mean things, then the polar bears would still exist.
It's like the kid who took high school philosophy because they thought that because they thought that the whole class would be sitting around asking why is life? Why is there air? And it's like, no, philosophy is an actual thing with arguments and meaning, and you actually have to learn and study, and it's not just random verbal jerking off.
Not at all. And so that's one of my gripes with this song is it does kind of lean into that fallacy that, well, if only people weren't here, wouldn't life be good? Thousands, if not millions of species went extinct long before humanity. Now, and I would wager more went extinct before we got here than have got extinct since we've been here. I can't prove that, and I'm not sure of its accuracy in totality, so don't yell at me. I'm potentially wrong about that. I'll acknowledge it.
Somebody fucking yells at you. One, I'm wondering how they got to this podcast.
Who knows? Anyway, point being, that's one of my gripes with this. As far as the song itself, again, it strikes me as unbelievably, needlessly, like, melancholic and self-indulgent, and this doesn't work for me. If you want to do a sad song about the long march to the grave on a special level, fine, I don't think it's all that useful to try and tie that into the existence of sapient life.
Not to be the Luddite of this podcast, I just thought it was a shit boring song.
That too.
Kerrang gave the album 3 out of 5 stars, saying at its best, Human Nature has the impressive magic that has made Nightwish one of Europe's biggest bands, but there's a feeling this time that for such a big concept, things haven't gone quite far enough. I believe I said that earlier.
You know, I've been trying to figure out where I think some of this stuff would be at home. You know, you mentioned, like a sweeping epic fantasy.
Yeah.
I don't think that's correct. The more I think about this, what this is museum music.
Funny you should mention that.
You ever go to a museum or whatnot, or like a national parks, what's the word, like visitor center, and they'll have those little like set aside auditoriums where they'll do this is where that song belongs. Like it should be playing over someone narrating something about the geographic and geological history of a national park.
To that end, I could also see this playing over one of the Epcot Center World Showcase travel movies that they play in the pavilions.
Yeah, or Disney's California Adventure.
Sure.
That's soaring over the world event. I think they've changed it now to. Or it used to be soaring over something else. Now it's soaring over California. Now it's soaring over the world. Like this is such kitschy, like, theme park. Look at all the pretty pictures and feel sad about stuff music.
Well, funny you should mention that, because Nightwish stated on January 22nd of this year that they became the first band ever to be given permission to do a photo shoot in legendary cathedral that is the Natural History Museum of London. How about that?
Okay.
Well, you said, like, this would be, like, sweeping, like, museum theater music, and they happen to have taken their promo photos in the Natural History Museum of London.
Makes sense.
Something here, man. There's connections we're making.
And that will actually be what is their entrance into the Disney pantheon.
Hey, we heard music. We want to put it in the World Showcase in Norway.
There we go.
Well, that's fine, but if we'd like to score your next animated musical, don't get a fucking ahead of yourselves.
Let's see how it goes. Okay.
Yeah, let's see how many parents complain about the music here in Norway. All right. For those who don't know, Norway is one of the pavilions in the World Showcase of Epcot Center.
Yeah. I think my actual favorite song on this album is now the one that's coming up next.
Hot diggity. Let's get to it. This is Tribal.
Tales for the
if you're like waiting all album for like a kick-ass metal song, you're not going to get much better than Tribal.
It's the only thing this is the heaviest song on the album, I mean musically. And it's probably the one I enjoy the most, based on my personal taste. It's got good rhythm, it's got good movement. It does just kind of, and given that it's called Tribal, it does lean into some of the more tribalistic drum elements and whatnot that you kind of hope it would.
I got a Roots Bloody Roots Sepultura feel on the drums there.
And this song is something this album desperately needed.
Yeah.
It needed something that moves,
I'm almost wondering if, like, they had this in the can, or if they had 8 songs, and then the producer was like, your fans are going to fucking hate this. Like, put something on there for the average metalhead, or you're going to lose people because this is too ethereal in many cases. And they came up with this.
Wouldn't shock me. Or at least that being the genesis of this song in particular wouldn't surprise me. There's stuff that's very much tooled to be part of the concept they're going for, but it does feel a little alien to the rest of it, and I mean that in a good way.
Tribal was described as Hato. Hato is Kai Hato, who is the drummer, as heavy and very percussive. I think that much is evident. This song, along with other tracks in the album, demanded Hato to upgrade his drum kit. And according to Hato, this song is an example to the variety of the very different musical styles presented in the whole album.
Well, no, it's a bit of evidence that there's more than one, but it's also the only example of this particular kind.
Yeah.
Like, hey, more than one. We got one. Look, we're not racist. We have one black guy. He's over there in the corner.
As one black kid that I went to camp with said to another black kid that was at the same camp when they put them both, the only 2 black kids in the entire camp together in the same room, hey man, they're trying to keep all those niggas in the corner, as they joked.
Yeah, again, I like the song, but it's... it is probably the best thing on this album, again, from my personal taste, but that's more relative. That's more speaking to kind of the slim pickings that this thing offers.
Yeah. All right. We're at the 90-minute mark here. I think I'm ready to wrap. I know you're ready to wrap, so let's wrap, brother. This is the very last song on side A, so it's the last song of the night. This is Endlessness. this album, I think 3 out of 5, solid B on this one, maybe B minus. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm more C plus to B minus.
Yeah.
Again, I think a lot of this, like with most concept albums, it kind of comes down to how much you're able to get into the concept and how well they're able to execute it. And we're ending here with, Endlessness, which is not a bad song. It's just, it's supposed to be kind of leaning into the notion that mankind's ultimate destination lies in the stars. It lies beyond the mere bounds of Earth, which is cool and all. I can have fun with that, but it's a little bit too much of the same old, little bit of creepy, little bit of pretty, little bit of, the same old kind of Nightwish playbook, even if, a little bit of even if there's some minor differences here and there. This is just, I struggled with this to really get into this song in particular.
Yeah, I'm kind of at my wit's end with this album by the time we get here. And I think taken by itself, I probably would have liked Endlessness. The little bit that I heard there at the end, the vocalization actually sounded like a singer from Ed Guy. But it's fine. And I don't mean that in the Tiger King Mandalorian. It's fine. There's some good stuff on here. There's some stuff I wasn't particularly interested in, but I don't think anything struck me as objectively bad or poorly done or incompetent. And I think that's why I tend to lean towards the B than the C, because I feel like I think there are some reviewers who C is average. C is average, C is average, C is average. I tend to want to go C or below when you start getting into incompetence or poor. There's nothing poor or incompetent about this album. I just think some of it, for me, is not that interesting, and a lot of it is, I hate to be crass when I'm supposed to be giving a serious review, but kind of up its own ass. I feel
there's a lot of this that tries way too hard.
Yeah. I feel like this is a band that had a vision, and it's one of those deals where it's like, they clearly had a vision, they tried to execute that vision, nobody gets that vision.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. There's a bit of the vision in question, how accessible is it generally?
Yeah.
And even worse, how many times does someone get it and just not like it anyway?
Yeah.
Like, there's a bunch of this stuff that I get. I just go, eh.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a problem. I think you can make something that's avant-garde and nobody gets it, and maybe that in and of itself gives it elevation. But I also think you can make something that's avant-garde, nobody gets it, and it's also not that good, or like not that interesting. Like, just because something is avant-garde doesn't necessarily make it deep, meaningful, or interesting.
Nah, that is very true.
And I think people tend to equate avant-garde with, like, just because you painted a can of soup, that automatically makes it interesting and good. And I'm like, well, not really. Not for everybody.
Not really, not at all in some cases.
I don't know where you lie on the can of soup thing, but I know I pointed that out in an art museum to somebody, and I remember their reaction very distinctly as the fucking can of soup. Yeah, but it's like an important piece of art history. It's a fucking can of soup. What are you trying to say here?
Oh, who was that? There's a French painter. I always want to say Mondrian, but I know it's not Mondrian. It's a similar sounding name. He's a more modern artist, and what he does is essentially takes 3 swaths of color. You've probably seen his work. It's just like, we have red at the top, and then orange, and then a little bit of it's like starts as red, reddish orange, orangish red. Like from top to bottom on a canvas. That's it. There's these big lateral, horizontal swatches of color. I looked at that and went, wow, I could have done that.
Yeah. I think if I had to put a quote on the DVD box, as it were, on the album cover, it's a piece of modern art that may be mistaken for better than it really is.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
All right. Well, I want to thank Robert Winfree for joining me on this trip through human, not so much nature, for Nightwish's 9th album. We're a day late and $1 short because I received treatment yesterday and was in no shape to do anything. So instead of getting Ozark with Jesse, you got Nightwish with Robert Winfree. Hopefully we'll get to Ozark.
I apologize in advance. I know a bunch of you were let down by that.
We'll hopefully get to Ozark Season 3. Jesse's schedule and availability is sketchy at best, so maybe we'll get to it, maybe we won't. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men, the shadow do. But next week, myself and Alexis Haina will be talking about the graphic novel adaptation of The Golden Compass. Then Alexis Haina and I will be reviewing the first season of his Dark Materials. If I'm feeling up to it, I will be doing another Sad Man special. I just listened to that last night.
The dry oat mush.
I was talking Lock and Key and referencing Green Eggs and Ham. So yes, I will be doing a Sad Man special review of the Black Dahlia murder, Verminous. And then myself and Sean Comer, in theory, as scheduled, may be doing it on trial for the movie version of The Golden Compass. There's a theme here, people, believe it or not. You can...
Mark's last desperate grasp at maintaining the vestiges of his synergistic schedule.
Yeah. Myself and the two Knuckleheads, Andrew Graham and David Wright, talked about all things Star Trek and finally got around to talking about Star Trek Picard. And myself and Jesse Starcher dropped a new source material, complete with gag reel, for Star Trek Picard Countdown from IDW. So that's what we got going on here. If you missed Jesse and you hadn't heard it yet, me and him reviewed Testament, Titans of Creation the previous week. And if you're wondering what happened to in this moment, it sucked and I didn't feel like doing it. So that's that. And then prior to that was one of my Sad Man solo shows, Heaven Shall Burn of Truth and Sacrifice. If you're interested in hearing more from Robert, he did a TV party with me for BoJack Horseman and a Damn You Hollywood for the video-on-demand release of The Gentleman. So you can catch him on those shows. Now, he normally does the 411 Ground and Pound radio show, but in a world with no live mixed martial arts, Robert, what are you talking about these days?
It kind of depends on how the week goes. We took last week off because there was nothing. The week before, I think I did one where I talked about the official cancellation of UFC 249, how much that sucks, but how much it's necessary, because I think that's accurate. One of the few... Mark, I don't know how closely you followed that whole saga.
Yeah, Disney said knock it the fuck off.
Yeah, after the governor of California, who is a generally useless human being, in my opinion, called Bob Iger and said, hey, you guys own a giant part of this. Well, you have a big say. We're not sure about how this is going to play out. After the UFC was intent on going to Tachi Palace Casino, which is an Indian reservation, it's on tribal land, in the state of California, when your nearest hospital is 40-some-odd minutes away.
Right.
And was probably going to be swamped with... It was just such a bad idea, and... the really shocking thing about this was how people reacted to it. There's a giant chunk of the MMA fan base that has bought into the notion that the media is the enemy.
That's a giant chunk of the national populace.
Well, sure, but it was you used to host the show that I now host. You've been around MMA in various capacities for a while. Mark, you will remember when we criticized roundly the various MMA media sites for essentially being the UFC PR wing.
Correct.
Right? And the last, say, 3 to 4 years, they'd kind of gotten away from that. Not totally, but a little bit. The number of people in response to this who told media members complaining, who were like, we're not sure this is responsible or safe, to shut up and go back to being PR. Like that was an actual response.
Terrific.
I hate I hate the MMA fandom. A lot of times. I really do. There's giant chunks of it that are just the worst. I shouldn't say the actual worst. They're not, Philadelphia Eagles fans or again, they could be worse, sure. But oh god, they are it's so bizarre. It's so weird how they kind of justify. Like, I'm sure there's a giant chunk of them that are just like, you know what? Who says we need stoppages? The Romans had the right idea with that to the death stuff. That's not an ethical way to live your life or to consume this. And I'm not Anyway, so I talked a little about that. I've also been kind of keeping myself busy by doing fighter studies / retrospectives. I did one a couple of weeks ago on Dominic Cruz. That was requested by Pat Mullen, and then I did one that dropped earlier this week on Shogun.
Yeah, but now you're finally doing one I'm interested in.
I don't have any scheduled right now, actually.
I thought you were doing Josh Barnett.
I could.
You've been. What are you watching tape on Josh Barnett for if you're not going to do a podcast on it? That's a giant waste of time.
No, that's how bored I am.
Do one on Josh Barnett, and I'll actually listen to it.
Oh, thanks.
Well, I'm sorry. I gave a shit less about your other ones. I have the Dominic Cruz one because I'm curious to see how much of it, and then he got injured. But I don't give a shit.
There's a bit of that.
I don't give a shit.
Look, hang on.
The other one you did.
No. No, those are the only two. I've done Cruz and Shogun.
No, you did one before that. The one
I did.
Got like a zillion hits on YouTube.
Yeah, I did one on how Alexander Volkanovski beat Jose Aldo.
Gesundheit.
You know who Jose Aldo is. Stop that.
That's the other guy, the Russian.
He's Australian.
Terrific. Do one on somebody I care about.
You don't care about anyone.
Do it on the War Master.
Oh, yeah. Again, I might look. Again, here's how bored I am when it comes to looking for fight content. I got done with the Shogun one and went, this fight took place on that same card, and one of the other cards he was on, and it was Krokop versus somebody, and I went, Krokop's fairly interesting. Let me start at the beginning.
I would listen to one on Krokop.
I know you would, because you're weird. But I got done with Krokop and went, there's not a whole lot to say there. He's not actually that interesting. I mean, his run, his best form run is in many ways something to behold.
Do one on
but
Fedor.
What?
Do Fedor.
I might. Again, but I watched all three of Krokop's fights with Josh Barnett and went, Barnett's a really ugly fighter. Has he always been like that? And then I'm not all the way through his career yet, but I got through a big chunk of it and went, yep, that is an ugly fighter. And that's not a reflection on his personal looks. And it's not a reflection on his technique, because a lot of what he does is technically fairly sound.
So I will listen to one of your fighter breakdowns on either or Josh Barnett or Fedor. You keep doing these other fellas, and I'll keep them in my podcast thing, but I may not get to them for a year.
Yeah, sure. Shogun is just the third best light heavyweight of all time. Just another guy. So, okay, since you have requested one on Barnett, I might do that. I might go back, because where am I? I think I stopped. I got done last night. I watched the Karatanov fight, so I need to get his loss to Cormier and then his second UFC run. Would be what's next. Yeah, I suppose I could do that. And I'm happy to. Anyone out there listening, if you happen to be an MMA fan, I do take requests, as you've just heard.
I'd also I'd also listen to Alistair Overeem.
I'm sure you would.
I'd also listen to Rampage.
Oh God, why would anyone? No, you know what? Hang on. That's not fair. I am too distracted by what he's become over the last 5 years.
Well, I would like to see you do that, but as he gets worse, you get more intoxicated, but you don't imbibe in anything that would intoxicate you. So I guess as you watch his fights, you hit yourself with heavier objects, I guess. I don't know. But I want to see you descend in. I want to hear you talk about a fighter while descending into madness.
If you want to do that, I don't think I would do it in the same format I've been doing. You and I would have to get together. No. Hey, hang on. I don't mean this. That's not a knock on you. But you and I get together. We pick a series of fights from a single fighter, and then we watch them together live and just comment over them.
Oh, in that case, we're doing Kimbo Slice.
No.
God damn it.
I absolutely refuse.
Well, we can't do Brock Lesnar because then I'll cry.
Why? Because big muscly man gets kicked in the liver and falls over?
Yes. But I think Rampage would be fun.
Well, especially... Oh, God. Rampage is... There's so much about Rampage that was so very good. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I were to curate a selection of his best fights, he's great. Unfortunately, he also intersperses that with poor training, lack of motivation.
Throwing a tantrum after being kicked in the knees by John Jones.
General craziness. And then, over the last few fights, you saw his fight with Fedor, Mark, right?
Yes, where he looked like Damon Wayans in The Great White Hype.
No. Stop that. I've seen that. That's a crappy fat belly on Damon Wayans. Rampage looked like he ate himself from 10 years ago. He looked like Fat Albert.
He looked like he ate King Mo.
Yeah, he is enormously out of shape. It is comical. I mean, it's
Yeah, we did commentary for that, all like 30 seconds of it.
Yeah, because Fedor hit him in the head and he fell over.
All right, wrap up. Come on, before there's an accident and I suddenly lose sound. Finish your plugs.
So, point being, if you and I want to get together and we'll do some curated fight watch-alongs, where we can see someone early, a couple early fights, a few near their peak, a few just on the other side of their peak, and then like their descent into just sadness.
Hilarity. Yes, I'm pitching Rampage. Put together a playlist.
We'll do Rampage, and then we'll do Brock, because we can do Brock in 3 fights.
And watch me get drunk? Sure.
No, look, we can do Brock in 3 fights, because he only has about 4.
Now, hang on. He's got, if we're talking just his UFC fights, there's more than 4. There's
6.
There's Mir twice, Randy Couture.
Hang on. Look, I'll run through his entire career for you right now, okay? He beats, I think it was Jinsu San in K1.
Yeah.
Loses to Mir in his debut. Beats Heath Herring.
Right.
Beats Randy Couture.
Right.
Beats Frank Mir.
Right.
Beats Carwin.
Nearly.
He beat Carwin. That's the official result. Loses to Kane. Loses to Overeem. Has a no contest with Mark Hunt. Grand total of 9 fights in his entire career. 8 of them in the UFC. We can get the entire breadth of his career, beginning, peak, and valley in 3 fights.
Okay, so I'm willing to do this experiment with you twice. One for Rampage and one for Brock.
Okay, sorry. When it comes to Brock, we'd have to watch 5. I think 5 of his 8 would do us.
Okay. No one needs to hear the magic as we're going to put it together. They'll just get the final result. Move on.
Yeah. Let's see if we can work together. And do you have Fight Pass still or not?
No.
I'll see if I can. Yeah, we'll work something out for some of the Rampage fights. I mean that, or we can get together and we'll do a screen sharing thing because I have Fight Pass and have since the day 1 basically. And we'll see about working that out. And yeah, we'll talk about Rampage because I will happily bury some of his later stuff. It's like, you used to be good. There's a period of time when you were the best light heavyweight in the world. And now look at you. You can't even see your toes.
You done?
Yeah, so anyway, point being, since now Mark has requested one, I will see about putting together one for Josh Barnett because ugly fighters in MMA are common, but very successful ugly fighters are kind of not. So I'll see about that. And yeah, Mark and I will we'll kind of see if we can work that out where we can do that. That'll be fun. And yeah, Mark ran over some of the other stuff I have coming up here on the network. And thank you all very much for listening. I come on here on occasion, mostly to save Mark from being sad. On the occasion that they talk about a band I'm interested in and let me know about it beforehand. Because there have been a couple of times when they've said, when I've seen the post results, I was like, here's our review of X. And I went, you son of a, I love that group.
Well, pay attention to the fucking schedule. I put it out a month ahead of time.
No, this was before you were really doing that consistently.
Oh, okay. All right, folks. Thank you for listening to our protracted plug session. And thank you in general for listening to our show. For Robert Winfree of 411mania.com, be well, be safe, and behave.